All right, I think we're almost at 4 o'clock. So let's get started while people are still joining in. I get to talk to you all for a few minutes about Gnarly and what's going on here. So you're here for the Maintaining Athletic Performance Through Years of Seasons session put on by Dr. Carrie Cooper. I'm Jason Hall. I'm the CFO here at Gnarly Nutrition. You're like, who's Gnarly? If you don't know, Gnarly is a sports supplement manufacturer. And we offer a full line of all natural NSF certified sports nutrition products. We design nutrition for athletes and individuals who pay attention to what goes on inside their bodies. We pride ourselves in offering clean, honest nutrition that tastes great. For the next 2 months, we're sharing ideas and information about preventing injuries, dealing with injuries, recovery tips in general, as well as establishing and maintaining baseline health and nutrition. We call this whole thing longevity in sport. We hope that the information passed through these clinics will help us all perform at our best throughout the rest of the year and for years to come. We've got a stellar lineup. I encourage you to sign up for as many of the clinics as you like. Related to this, our newest product, Gnarly Collagen Pro, is now available. And now we think it's important that you understand the why behind a product and not just take it because someone told you to. Collagen helps with injury prevention and repairs tendons and ligaments, ultimately keeping you doing more of what you love. And this fits right into the theme of longevity in sports. Following the clinic, we'll be emailing and recording this clinic, as well as providing an opportunity for you to try out Gnarly Collagen Pro at a discount, along with another free gift. So watch your emails. Last couple items I want you to be aware of. If you follow us on Instagram at Gnarly Nutrition, we're announcing a big giveaway starting on November 30th, so watch out for that. And then lastly, if you enjoy this clinic, please take a minute to take a screenshot or share whatever you feel is appropriate and post on the socials. You can tag us and the presenter, Carrie, and at the end of the clinic, you'll see a short survey that takes just a minute or two to fill out. We'd love to hear your thoughts. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that says Q&A. Please use that to submit any questions. And now, what you're really waiting for, I'm happy to introduce this Dr. Carrie Cooper to talk about longevity in sports. Dr. Carrie Cooper is a sports medicine and physical therapist based in Salt Lake City here. She founded Rev Physical Therapy in 2017 and works with recreational and professional athletes from a wide spectrum of sports. She's a strong interest in climbing, medicine research, as well as being an accomplished climber herself. So that's the end of my spiel. And now I'll turn it over to Carrie, and I'll try to do my best to manage the chat as we go. So go ahead and take it away, Carrie.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks, Gnarly, for having me today. And also, thanks for joining me, everybody, right now or in the future, whenever you're watching this. My name is Carrie. I'm a physical therapist. I work with athletes, but I'm also a climber. And I've been a climber for 20 years. I'm kind of old at this point, and I have 2 kids. So giving a little bit about me, but just to segue directly into what we're going to talk about today, want to say first that acute and traumatic injuries, they happen, and some of these injuries are preventable, but some are also just dumb luck. Most injuries occur over time, and there are those little nagging things that we ignore and allow to sort of take on a bigger role. But how do we reduce the possibility of even getting those little nagging injuries? I'm going to just get straight to the chase and tell you what my #1 rule is: undo the doing. So what does that mean? Whether it's a gym workout or a day in the backcountry, a simple self-assessment is pretty necessary, followed by targeted stretching, nutrition, rest, strength training to identify those weak links and build them up so that they don't become that nagging injury or even the possibility for a nagging injury. people who have had the opportunity to, or people who have not had the opportunity to challenge their bodies, have a very different experience of pain than those who have had the opportunity, like athletes. So pain in this case is, or as we have conventionally known it to be, is not a good assessment tool. We need or have to become a little bit more in tune with our bodies and those subtle changes that occur when we are adding to our normal activities, either in intensity or volume, and kind of discover how those activities are changing us in subtle ways. And so that in order to be able to self-assess, you also have to know what your baseline is. And so typically in looking at a baseline, we want to know, what is your normal range of motion? What do your muscles normally feel like? But if you haven't ever done a baseline self-assessment, you might not know what that is. And so I highly recommend, and it's great that you can go back to this clinic, because all of us have different body IQs. So if I give you a cue right now, I don't know how you're going to take it into your body. I don't even know if you're going to understand what my words are. And so we need to have as much feedback as possible. We can do that tactily, so you can just put your hand on the joint or on the area that we're trying to assess. You can use a mirror as feedback, or you can use your own eyes. So first off, we need to know kind of what our norms are. And so just to start that out, range of motion is different for everyone. There is no norm that you have to reach, but there are norms for efficiency in your body. So say I'm an overhead athlete. I mean, just imagine I'm, not actually. So say I go to lift my arm up. And let's just start. I've been here. I've been training here. I've been pulling. I've been doing this. This is how I rock climb. Oh, if you were here, it'd be different, I swear. So as you're pulling, we have a shorter range of motion. Oftentimes, we're repeating a specific move or a specific range of motion, and our body adapts. So regardless of what your activity is, your body is going to adapt to whatever activity you do repetitively. And if you're strengthening a muscle in that repetitive range of motion, likely you're not getting to the full extent of your range of motion, which is fine because that activity didn't require you to get there. But when you're going to have a recovery day or after that activity, we want to find those total ranges of motion. So if I'm going to pull, and I reach my arm up and I grab here and I pull here and I repeat that over and over again, my body gets to know that range of motion is here to here. And so it becomes hard for my body to then find what my total range of motion is, and I have to remind it. So that is one thing. Range of motion, we all kind of fall on this spectrum, and it goes from hypermobile to hypomobile. Hypermobile is very much mobile. Hypomobile is not very much mobile. And that is not to say that people who have a lot of flexibility, none of this is out of the norm spectrum. So we want our muscles to be supple and powerful and to support our entire joint range of motion, but we have to know where we are in that spectrum. So hypermobile people oftentimes have to be the strongest of us all because their joints move a lot. Conversely, hypomobile people need to work on their mobility a lot. Those people love yoga. Hypermobile people are really good at yoga, but it's not necessarily really good for them unless they are being super strong. So let's talk about the shoulder first. As an overhead athlete, probably the number one thing to be familiar with on your body is your external rotation. So we start with your elbows here. Let's have everybody stand up. I'll give you a second, move things out of the way. We'll all stand up. And now bend your elbows to 90 degrees. You want to have about 10 degrees away from your body so that it is not behind you, not in front of you. I look like a robot. Okay. So from here, you want to just find your external rotation and just sense, is it different side to side? Can you get this far? Does your external rotation do something like this, where maybe one side is significantly less than the other? Are we getting pretty close on both sides? You have two halves of your body that you get to compare, which is really nice. So we get to here. The funny thing about external rotation is that as we bring our arms up overhead, and you can do this with me, if you're lacking external rotation here, you will be significantly, exponentially lacking it up here. So let's bring that back in. We're gonna go to here. We're gonna go into overhead flexion. So I'm gonna keep my thumbs up and we're gonna just lift straight up and overhead. And you wanna keep your arms tight. You'll notice maybe sometimes we get out here. If it's the same side to side and it feels fairly easy, that's probably okay. But if you're an overhead athlete and we have to be reaching places, we might wanna target that just a little bit and see if we can get a little bit more out of it. Let me talk about the shoulder girdle. So it's difficult to discuss the shoulder without talking about the neck, thoracic spine, and especially the core. But just to keep things simple, I'm going to hone in on the glenohumeral joint for just a second, because one of the top injuries that I see in overhead athletes is shoulder impingement. And that is purely a joint range of motion thing typically. So, gosh, I just can't say that everybody fits into it perfect. So we go here, then we go here. We're gonna straighten out. We're gonna lift our arms up and we're gonna find out where our external rotation ends. So as you're lifting up, if you find that you begin to rotate your palms forward like this, that's internal rotation. So there's a difference between external and internal rotation. We're gonna lift the arms back up. So we'll sense, okay, if I stop here, if I start to internally rotate at that spot and I'm an overhead athlete, I'm gonna get that motion from somewhere else. I'm gonna hit the top of my shoulder range of motion, pushing up against the AC joint. Lock that right up in there, use my upper trap, and most likely disengage my core, arch my back so that I can reach that hole. We have effectively given ourselves the opportunity for shoulder impingement and destabilize the shoulder. So just thinking about external range of motion in the glenohumeral joint right now. So when we work with joints, it's very subtle. A stretch, you often feel it. You feel it in the big muscles. When we're dealing with joint structures, it's a lot smaller, more subtle. So let's hone it in a little bit. And we're gonna take your arm, keep your shoulder away from your ear. We're just gonna draw that arm across your body. So wherever you can get, if you find that you start to reach across your body and your shoulder elevates like this, let's just lower your arm a little bit because your posterior shoulder needs to stretch in order to accept that gliding motion. We are totally doing joint mobilizations here. This is not a rhomboid stretch or a deltoid stretch might be that if it needs to be, but definitely not rhomboid. So we're going to try to keep it in the shoulder joint. So if I reach my arm forward, I'm wearing black today, sorry. If I reach my arm forward and I keep it in the shoulder joint, I don't really move my scapula very much. But if I allow my scapula to come forward, I now feel it in my spine and I've kind of rotated around. Let's rein that in a little bit and we'll just keep it in the shoulder joint. So wherever you get to, you might feel a stretch here. I've done a really good job after I went bouldering of stretching this. And now from here, let's see if we can just bend at the elbow, keep that hand in our robot looking position. And now we're going to externally rotate in the arm bone. So this is all glenohumeral motion right here. So can you get there? That's a good first assessment. And it's very interesting that joint range of motion changes very quickly, both for the negative and for the positive. But if you stay on it, you can invite that movement into your joints and it will recover so that you can spend another day pulling as hard as you can. So then we can also turn this into like a twisty arms sort of position after you've done it on both sides. And this can be a really great stretch. So from here, we know what our external range of motion is down here. We know what our external range of motion is here. So now let's see if we can take that external range of motion. So it's at just about midline here. Let's bring it out a little bit and see if we can keep that external rotation as you lift your arm up overhead. So what is happening in your arm? Did you lift your shoulder up to get there? This is another position where if you feel it pulling here, you might have to stretch your lat. That is also necessary. The big stuff, stretch the big stuff. And then we get into the tiny stuff. So external rotation in the shoulder joint, so that when you lift your arms up overhead, the shoulder has room to glide and lift, so that when you load it, you aren't just bumping up against that AC joint and impinging your bicep tendon, your rotator cuff, all those things. They get a little achy and sore. So, number one, done. How much time? Are we finished? Just kidding. Okay, so let's check in for just a second. What happened in your core when you lifted your arms up? Did you come up overhead and then you disengage to get there? So the next thing is going to be when you're practicing joint mobilization in the shoulder, keep your core tight, i.e. keep your rib cage engaged to your pelvis so that we are true to our real range of motion. Okay. So that was a super complicated thing made very simple. I can talk about this for hours on end. When we're reaching out and up overhead, we start to get a little bit more into the intricacies of shoulder blade motion, because your shoulder blades have to move. When you get up here, your upper traps actually have to help. There are muscles in our bodies that we've sort of taught, no, don't work. That's gonna lead to shoulder impingement, but that's their job. So if you're doing your hangs up overhead, make sure that you have external rotation. I'm sorry, you can't see my hands. Make sure that you have the external rotation to even get into that position and you're not already sort of internally rotated and locking it down. And then if you go from here and you're internally rotated and you drop your shoulders out of your ears really hard, whoa, shoulder impingement, look out. So be really, really true to yourself self-assess where you're at that day and decide, is it a good idea if I super load my tendons and ligaments and my shoulders in this position, or do I need to take 5 extra minutes and just do a little bit of joint mobility? So I'm off my soapbox about that. All right, so moving on to a little bit further down the chain. So hips and knees. So let's all find a space where you can kind of sit down on the floor and still see me. I'm actually gonna take you places in here. So we're gonna come over to my stretching table. Okay. All right. For the pelvis, in this position, we want to be able to sit up on your sits bones. So what is that? Those are the true knobby protrusions on the base of your pelvis. So the goal is to be able to sit up on those. If you can't, I would grab a yoga block or a pillow just to prop yourself up, because we're going to stretch your legs. So hip joints. With all of the skiers and snowboarders and mountain bikers out there, we get some serious quad strength and tightness. So I'm going to teach you a quad smash. If you can just go ahead, if you can do this in this position, fabulous. If you can't get here and you need to be up on your sits bones, bend a knee, it's fine. You get a nice external rotation in your hip. It's a true for one. So now we're going to use the your forearm as a smashing rolling pin. You're going to tuck it into that hip joint. Just tuck it right into there. And now begin, you can use some extra pressure on your arm and just push along your long length of your quad. If this is a necessary thing for you, you will feel this immediately. I like doing self-release a little bit more than just going straight to a foam roller or some other device, because you just have more feedback. And if I'm going to reinforce some of those ideas from the beginning of the discussion, if you can start honing in and tuning into what's going on in your body, you're better able to assess day to day. And to be honest, as we get older, that becomes more and more and more important. Maybe a 22-year-old doesn't necessarily need to do a lot of self-assessment, but as we age, we absolutely do. So start soon. Start now, start today. Again, I like the self-release. So if we're pushing along the quad, we get to find all those different vectors. So you can kind of roll that rolling pin arm across and then go down the side. You can go down the center, you can go down the inside. But at some point in time, you're going to notice that your patella or your kneecap will relax and disengage. And that's a really nice time to move your patella up and down and just sort of give that quad tendon a little relaxation. So as we go through that, our quad smash, you should be able to access a little bit more of that inner thigh to stretch it. And so we just lean into that a little bit. Okay. So if we've repeated that side to side, we've done our quad smash. The hip joint is not anything like the shoulder joint. The shoulder has a ton of range of motion, and all of these teeny tiny, the rotator cuff that's helping pull the humerus into the glenohumeral joint, and then you've got these big muscles surrounding it. The hip joint is very different. We have a lot of big muscles. We don't have that many teeny tiny muscles, but they are there. So what we want to do is we can either move that hip around in the ball and socket joint. So if you want to follow me, I'm just going to, we're pretending that we've already done this on both sides. So now we're going to go on your back, and I've grabbed my tennis ball or racket ball or my therapy ball, something that's squishy enough that it's not going to dictate to you and press too hard on sensitive structures. So now we're just going to lift that knee, whatever leg that you're on. You're just going to gently roll that hip around in the ball and socket joint. You want this to be as passive as possible. So if you need to use a band or a belt or something just to help you move, then we'll do that. So we're just going to assess where are the tight spots. And then after you've done that, you can stretch your hamstring, you do whatever you want. However, I'm going to take this ball, and when I use like a trigger point ball, I don't just put it on the floor and lay on it and roll on it. I actually use it to kind of self-assess and see what's going on. So it's a gentle pressure that goes. Usually I start in the spine, but I'm going to keep it central to the hip today. So we'll start basically in your glutes, and you just slowly lower onto it. And if you're like, I don't really feel anything, come off of it, move it either down or up or wherever you want to start. So if you think of your femur bone is connected to your pelvis, and then there's this sort of circle all the way around that femur bone that is your glute, your glutes. And your glutes, either they can pull your leg back behind you, they can lift it out to the side, they can rotate it. So we really have to go all the way around that crest of your pelvis. So if you're back in the back and you lean onto it, sometimes if you want to get super deep, you can sit into it and then mobilize your hip and sort of find where you need that deep hip release. Again, we're not really stretching anything, but we're stretching things. It's great. So from here, you just come off of it. Now I will say, with a self-assessment / mobilization ball, if anything feels like a bruise, it's probably not a good thing to press on it too hard. There are some sensitive structures in and around the hip joint, like the sciatic nerve. So if you start to find a sensitive spot, just know that it feels like a bruise and don't push on it. So we have gone through external rotation in the shoulder joint. We've gone through some quad smash in the leg, a little bit of mobility in the patella and in the hip. And I want to open this up because I am much better in person on this, to some questions from the audience. So I know I went through that super fast. Okay, first one is, when I try doing, it's from Vanessa, when I try doing a front lever, my shoulders, okay, first off, congratulations on trying front levers. Those are really hard. My shoulders feel like they are blocked. And I have the impression that it is the shoulders and not the core that stops me from performing this exercise. I know it's hard to assess through the screen, but would you attribute this to poor external rotation? Let's go back to that. In a front lever, when you're pulling this way, it's not as much of the external rotation. I don't think that would block it. That's a confusing question, actually. I would have never thought of that. So my apologies for not really knowing the answer to that. Let's see. I think that when it comes to external rotation being a really, really important aspect to shoulder health, it occurs when your arms go above 90 degrees, either in an abduction plane or in a flexion plane, either or. So sometimes if you don't have those basic, the rotator cuff, the muscles that kind of sit the shoulder in the shoulder joint really snugly and nicely, then you're going to use your big muscles to help keep your shoulder stable. And those muscles I'm not going to say they have shorter ranges of motion, but if those are the ones that you're really relying on, and this can be said globally for anything, if you are relying solely on your big global moving muscles, then you're missing the full joint range of motion. And that can be in the hip, in the shoulder. Yeah. So being able to access your rotator cuff is really, it's important for normal joint range of motion. Tight hips in child's pose. Ooh, solution. So it's funny that you say that, because sometimes it has to do with tight hip flexors, getting you down into that position. So I'll show really fast a way to get into your hip flexor, and you can use a ball to get into your hip flexor, but really in that hip range of motion. So if you have tight glutes, you'll most likely feel it in your back. But if you have tight hip flexors, you'll feel it in that inability to fold at the hip joint. So if your hip flexors are stopping you from fully bending over, you want to actually stretch them across the hip this direction. So it's that pelvis tuck and then lean forward. So you open up the hip joint here. And then if you can get around over to the front, because the TFL, the anterior fibers of the TFL can actually limit hip extension. And so if you can get not only into the muscles in the front of your hip and your quad, but also across to the side. So that's a really good, if you're gonna hone into trying to get some more hip motion, I would hone in on some of those muscles just to make sure that they're released and you're allowing that joint to actually move. And you know, I am 100% a proponent of dry needling, massage therapy, movement classes, anything, I mean, even like a topical analgesic that will help you just get into a joint range of motion a little bit, so you're not being held by your big muscles. That's great. Yeah, stretch your hip flexors, Craig. Let's see, there's more. I love all of this. Thank you so much, you guys. So, oh, shoulder blade and lat. Yes, thank you so much, Nathan, for asking that question. So he says, I'm interested in hearing more surrounding the relationship between the shoulder blade and lat. Could you recommend some exercises and stretches? Okay, so let's return back. Like I said, I could talk about shoulder for days. Let's return back to that general range of motion. Ooh, we'll combine it with our child's pose. This is gonna be fun, guys. Okay. So say we've stretched our hips, we got in there, it's all good, we got our ball, moved it all around. We're gonna drop into a child's pose. So external range of motion, right? Thumbs are gonna be up. Keep your thumbs up. So place your hands and your forearms down on your mat or wherever you are. I have to walk my knees back a little bit So this is now a modified child's pose, specifically to give your joints, your glenohumeral joint a mobilization, an external rotation. This is great. The thumbs are up. We're just gonna glide back. Keep your thumbs up. Keep your elbow armpits up. They're gonna stay there. So I can actually keep going, but my right lat is super tight. So I get to here and I'm kind of stopped by that right lat. So now what you can try to do is you can karate chop the table, the floor, wherever you're at, give it a little pressure, hold it for 5 seconds, and then see if you can access that range of motion a little bit more. If not, the best way to stretch your lat is actually thumb down and you pull away from it. And I'll show you that on these little bars over here. So if we've super strongly been like in this position and we're pulling, that posterior shoulder becomes very tight. And that can be your posterior capsule. It can be your rotator cuff, i.e. most likely your teres minor and major. But it can also be your lat that's limiting overhead motion. So if we take thumb down, and this is a big muscle, you're gonna lean away from it, and you want to feel this as a conventional stretch. So we've gotten that a little bit. I like to kind of roll around and find out, like, is it my lat? Is it actually my serratus? Is it my teres? So if you play with the stretch, just kind of feel where you find that pull and that tug. It might help you identify exactly where you're tight. Okay, hopefully that helped. And then you have a self-assessment tool. So then you just go back to your modified child's pose and we see how we did. I love the test retest. So if you can find for yourself some motions that you can base your assessment tool on and then try to be consistent and go back to those each time. So say you found out that a lat stretch and arms overhead, exactly as we have just been doing, is like the perfect thing for you. And you feel what that feels like when you are rested and recovered, and then you do something, and then you come back to it. And that's your assessment tool. What about, okay, hold on, I've got quite, ooh, I hope I didn't just end that. Okay, apologies, guys. All right. Ooh, when doing push-ups from arch, I don't feel my lats engaging or engaging as much as they should. Most of the movement comes from my traps and upper back. Is this an issue of mind-muscle connection? Ooh. Traps and upper back. Okay, let's answer that pretty generally. Sometimes we have more awareness of certain areas of our body than others. And it's hard for me to answer that specifically, Arsh, because I don't know what your body IQ is. And so if you're more honed in on your upper traps, I would beg to question, are your upper traps limiting your range of motion? And do you do most of your range of motion with your upper traps, which would be a really funny muscle to do a push-up with? But I mean, I could see pressing like this. I don't know. Let's go to another one. Okay. Ooh. Wrist mobility. Oh man, that's a good one. Synovitis, medial tendon. Well, so some of these are really fantastic questions. And they're complex. So there were some, let's see. What about, okay. Ooh, best IT band stretches or rolling techniques. Okay, so this is my favorite. Where's my ball? I tucked it up here. Okay, so back to our ball. TFL, tensor fascia lata, is the tiny muscle that's connected to your IT band. The IT band is a long guideline wire, essentially, for the femur bone, but it does connect at the knee. So a lot of times people think of it as just one thing, or they want to get into the tendon, but really it has anterior and posterior fibers. So if we're using a ball for our hip mobility, we can easily address the IT band. So you can check your IT band by bringing your leg up like this, drop it slightly across, keep your hip stable. So if you lift your leg like this, you're twisting in your back, and we've now gotten out of your IT band. So if you get to here, you drop that leg across your body, don't change anything in your back, start to straighten your leg out. As the IT band crosses the leg, then you join. If you start to feel it in your hip, et voila, we're going to put our ball right there. So my posterior fibers and my TFL are very tight. So now I'm going to put my ball right there, and I'm actually going to roll onto it and then find, sorry guys, you can't see, find where that spot is and just roll my leg around until I get into it. If you feel like a strong muscle soreness or an ache, just hold it for about 7 seconds and it should release 7 to 10 seconds. You don't have to stay there for a half an hour. In fact, don't stay there for a half an hour, you will bruise yourself. So there's that. And then you can retest that across the body IT band stretch. The other way that you can do IT band is to anterior fibers across and then like this. So that now, and honestly, the anterior fibers of my TFL are totally fine. I actually feel that as a side stretch, which is awesome in and of itself. And again, if you can identify a spot, you can either push in there, you can stretch it, you can use a ball, or a combination of all of the above. Hopefully that helped. Oh, tight hamstrings. Oh, I love this question from Patrick. My partner has EDS, which is a hyper joint mobility. She often arches her back while hangboarding. Okay, so this is a point that we could talk about a lot. You've got to know why you're doing something. So if you go on the hangboard and you arch your back and pull, is it because you don't have the shoulder range of motion? Is it because your back is way stronger than your front? Or is it because that is your normal position? Some people have hyperlordosis as a normal position, and they are very strong in that position. What we get into with deciding, is that wrong? Is everything else balanced? You know, can they, instead of having something up overhead, find whatever that neutral position is for their spine? And then, for example, so say I've got my arms up overhead. I don't know if you guys can see this. But for me, neutral has a slight space. My rib cage is engaged. If my arms are up overhead, you better believe my rib cage is engaged. And then, if I can, keep it there, and then lower my legs down to the ground and back up. Then probably it's okay that you have a little bit of space in your low back. If you have a disc herniation or you have a known back injury and you are pulling constantly into hyperlordosis or extension to get your strength, I would highly recommend that you do a little bit of core work because we need that balance. We need the transverse abdominis, which draws across to confer with multifidi in the back, which help segmentally to stabilize. But we're digressing. So let's go back. Oh, what about pain? Whoops. Yeah, you're welcome. What about pain when I do retraction of the scapula? Leonardo, I'm not sure what you mean by pain. So like soreness or there's actually pain? So I'm gonna try to stay a little bit away from some diagnostics here. I highly recommend that if you have pain or something that's limiting your activity, let's talk about that for a second. So when I work with athletes, I spoke a little bit in the beginning that we have a little bit of a different relationship with pain than most people. So I don't like to use pain as a guide. But if you modify your pain scale, it can make sense. So pain, for me, it's sort of a 0 to 8 scale. A 1 is I'm aware that I have a left arm or a left leg or a right side of my neck. That means that I'm aware that this is different than this. Because usually, like, are you aware, whatever else that you have in your body, like, are you aware that it's there? That might be a little bit pain. Like, it might just be something that's trying to, like, knock on your door and say, hey, I'm here. Excuse me. So left side, I'm aware I have a left arm. A 2 is, I'm aware I have a left arm. And I'm gonna start playing with it and see if maybe I can figure out what's going on. Something going on. A 3 is, I'm aware I have a left arm, I'm futzing with it. I'm gonna start moving it and see if I can change what's happening. That might mean that I start to begin to think about how can I change my activity if this doesn't go away. And that leads us to a 4. A 4 is, I am changing my activity. I am changing the way that I'm doing my sport, a move, anything. I'm altering it to see if I can change it. So this is where we start to get into a chronic, it can become chronic. Because if you decide, I'm just not gonna do that move anymore, and it doesn't go away, or you don't know that it's going away, you have now entered that 5th category of pain, which is, I'm aware of it, I tried to change it, and I'm still doing stuff, and it's not changing, so I'm gonna take something for my pain. And to be honest, most athletes don't take things for pain. They just kind of push through it, or they stop doing that, and that's an activity limitation. So now you're taking your activities away from yourself, and you're altering them. And that, for me, that's kind of like a no-go zone unless you really need to do it. We have to find out, why is your body telling you that you have a left arm? And how do we change that? So pain is a funny thing. So when Leonardo, when you said, I have pain when I retract, I'm now wondering, well, do you have, like, what is it that is actually painful? Is it that the muscle itself is tired and sore? Is it that your spine has some altered mobility and is stopping your shoulder blade motion? Is it that you have an injury? You know, I'm starting to ask some of these questions, and we can get a lot of that from history. So let's move on to the next question. Let's see. Craig, all I got is squat. That's all I said. squat. Regarding the IT band, when I square, I can feel a tendon like element on the outside of my knee pop over one of the, oh, ouch, moral head. I don't know. It could be your IT band. It's a good place to start, but there are, if it's on the outside, you also have your hamstring. So squatting. Let's talk about, do we have time? We have a little time. So with hip mobilizations and being able to squat, and I go hang out with Natasha Barnes tomorrow. I'm sure she'll talk about squatting. She's amazing. She taught me how to squat. But I do want to talk a little bit about hip range of motion in order to get into a super deep squat. So I think that everybody should be able to stand up from the floor without using their hands from a squat. So that means, and I'm gonna give myself a little caveat here because this is kind of squishy, so I might not be able to do it. But if you have knee range of motion, you have a really strong core and you can kind of pull yourself up and up. I'm gonna cheat. Watch me cheat. If you can pull yourself up and over your feet, you should be able to access your glutes to stand you up. I could do this earlier today, I swear. But hip mobility is really important for squatting, and for especially deep squatting. I work with jiu-jitsu athletes, and the amount of time that they spend like this, gotta be able to access your glutes. So more deets on my last question about hip impingement. Oh, FAI. Okay, hold on. Good full range of motion. So other than working on good to mitigate the activities we're doing, what else are the secrets of maintaining athletic performance through years of seasons? I'm 45 now, a climber, runner, yoga person. I feel like my body, patient's bodies, is like an older car. It does require more maintenance. So I'm also in my 40s, and I think that just being true to yourself and recognizing that, you know, we all set out these agendas, and you can set yourself an agenda like 3 weeks in advance, and maybe one day you don't sleep as well and you don't recover as well, or you forgot to supplement with proper nutrition, or who knows, 2020 happened, right? You might have to take a day off. Sometimes you have to give yourself something good in order to get more performance afterwards. And I think that being able to just hone in on what's happening in your body, and how your body, how does your body deal with lack of sleep, dehydration, increased intensity in your activity. I think that probably the one best thing for us as we get older and stay athletic is actually consistency. So, you know, those huge alterations of schedule that throw us off, they require you to self-assess when that happens and just notice like, oh man, my core is not working as hard today. So maybe, you know, maybe you do exercises to re-engage your core, and then you can do the things that you were going to do. Or maybe you're like, gosh, you know, my left knee today is really sore. You get on the bike, you give it something good, and then you ask it to work really hard. And I think that just being able to sort of ask your body what's going on a day-to-day basis leads to more consistent performance. Sleep and recovery. The ability to be more introspective. Yeah. Yes. I like that. I like that word, Jennifer. Internal environment. Yeah. So I think that being a thinking athlete as we get older is incredibly important. Yeah. I don't know. Are we out of time or can I take more? Let's see. Oh, hamstring injury. Oh, okay. I have to say high hamstring strains are finicky. They are so fickle and they can really yo-yo if you stretch them too far or if you load them too soon. They're tricky. So I don't think I have time to go into high hamstring strains right now. I will say that a hamstring likes to be loaded, and it likes to be loaded in a short range of motion and then a growing range of motion. And that takes a lot of, it's an art to sense how far is too far. And they change daily. So sorry, I could be more specific on that one. All right, you guys. I don't know if, oh, there we are. Gnarly is with us.
Hi.
I think we're about out of time. Hopefully I didn't rant and rave too much. And it was useful for people. Thank you so much for joining me. I actually had a really good time talking to myself.
That was so helpful, so informative. Carrie, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with all of us. Appreciate it.
It was really fun. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right, see ya.